you guys are joining right now, courtesy of Gigabit. Anybody here from Gigabit? David, would you like to represent Gigabit and talk about what they're looking for? Not looking for anything. I work on consulting for Gigabit at the moment, and they don't want to shop on that. They're hiring at the moment. And they have been like long time, year and a half-ish supporters of this meetup. It's a big enterprisey kind of job, but they have good culture. They've been very dedicated to this community. So if you are on the job search, please keep them in mind. I would also like to thank our wonderful space host, Ciro, otherwise known as Super Fragala. Frankie, would you like to talk about what you guys do?
Yeah, so if you don't know, you're ready. Frankie, Ciro, we're a small consultancy, very small, kind of dedicated team, mostly doing Rails and Ember, solely. Do a lot of that, experiment with a lot of WebGL stuff, and try to split our time doing web app stuff and also non-experimental stuff. And also when I'm up here, I'll do a little plug as well. I help plan Dinosaur.js, which is a JavaScript conference that last year was our first year, or doing it again this year. June 15th and 16th, Space Gallery. And so check out the website, so tickets left. There's stickers back there on that little spread that you walk in, so grab those. Yeah, that's it.
Cool, thank you, Frankie. Additionally, Acorn Consultants, which is it's David Baker back there, who is an Ember learning He's an Ember Learning Team member, a co-organizer of this meetup, an all-around good-ass guy. David, would you like to talk about what you do? Cool. Two more. Ibotta. So Ibotta is the app that pays you cash. Ben would like to tell you all about it.
I would. Like Kyle said, we're the app that pays cash back. So our goal is to be the go-to app for rewarded shopping. So anytime you go shopping, you check Ibotta and get cash back for the purchases you're about to make. We work in real life sort of locations like King Soopers and places in the mall, but also on mobile apps like Drizzly. So for instance, if you use Drizzly, if you launch Drizzly through Ibotta, you get 7% cash back every single time you use Drizzly. So we are hiring DevOps engineers, platform engineers, full stack engineers, pretty much like company-wide, including in like marketing and customer support, etc. So if any of those things sound interesting, talk to me after.
Perfect. Then our final sponsor is Galvanize, which donates space to us every once in a while. I think everybody in this room either goes there, graduated from there, or already knows what it is. So that's Galvanize. Cool. So who here is your first Ember meetup? Cool. About half the room, third of the room. Welcome to our community. So one of the things that sets us apart from other kinds of frameworks is that this is a community-first framework. This isn't sponsored by Angular. It's not sponsored by Google. It's not sponsored by Facebook. This is owned, maintained, operated by us, the Ember community. And that's really at the core of everything we do. So we're going to talk about EmberConf today. All right, so we went to EmberConf. Outstanding. One of the things that I always really appreciate about EmberConf is that isn't when you find out the new features that they're releasing, because it's such a collaborative community effort. It's very hard to make anything a secret in the community. So we end up talking about the future of the web and the platform and where we want to go next. And I don't know, you'll find people in this community who've been here a long time. I don't even write Ember apps like full time anymore, but like you couldn't ever take me away from this community. Like this is family to me. So we welcome you to be a part of the family as well. So your community leaders here in Denver. Hi, I'm Kyle. We also have as well as
Dave.
Ben?
and brand new Denver community organizer. Cool. So if you have questions about the community, how you can get involved, other things that are happening outside of this meetup, please come and ask us. Happy to talk to you more about it. Additionally, on top of this meetup, and this is a good segue into a cool thing that's happening in Denver in 2016, 2017, that's the year that is, right? We have an open source night. So, David, would you tell us more about open source night? The app for open source night?
What about it?
Real world.
Yeah, real world.
Cool. So another thing that's happening in the imminent future is some of you who showed up early saw that we were meeting about things that are happening in Denver in 2017. And one of the things that we want to start offering is a larger scale beginner workshop. So what we're going to start out with is every 2 months, we're going to have like a 3-ish hour workshop for absolute beginners to the framework where you walk away with a complete Ember app. And you get training on that and all that kind of stuff. So this is replacing any of you who've been to the 5:30 beginner workshop, and we were kind of cramming an awful lot into half an hour to give you context for the meetup. We're going to replace this with that so we can start building up the community more. Another thing that's going to come down the pipe is more like super targeted deep dives, a lot less frequently than this meetup, but maybe once a quarter. If you're interested in really getting into the metal, the bleeding edge kind of stuff in Ember, concurrency seems to be the hot topic of 2017. We'll also have content for that. But since it is a community framework, this isn't going anywhere. That's sort of the shape of that, and I'm really, really excited about what we're doing. Some other stuff. For having the slides. Good. So Ember News, that's basically this talk, so I'm going to skip that. One last thing, do we have people with Ember Jers talk right now? Are they looking to hire Ember developers here? Sweet, so we have the other one. Just a bunch of people having a good time learning about framework. All right, that's all I got. So we have more food in the back. Probably got a few more beers left. And without any further ado, it is my distinct pleasure to introduce a longtime member of the community, dear friend of mine, about to be a dear friend of yours. Ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together for Derek Bassett.
Okay, cool. All right. Hi, my name is Derek Bassett. I work for Comcast for the Viper team. That stands for Video, IP, Engineering, and Research on alternate content. I originally started writing Ember JavaScript 3 years ago for a startup, and we were later acquired by Comcast, and I've been with them for over a year and a half. Working with Comcast has been actually an amazing opportunity. We're just down the street here next to Union Station. I've worked with some incredible individuals, and if you ever get the opportunity to actually interact with them, I highly recommend you check out the team. What is alternate content, you ask? It's making it so that content providers can black out content for a few individuals and allow the rest of us to watch games across the country. We use EmberJS as a part of our administration tool that allows administrators of our systems to set up blackout windows across the country. So why do I want to talk about testing now? There's a great YouTube video. intro to testing an Ember JavaScript application done by our own Ben Limer here from Ember JavaScript Denver Meetup in July of 2015. The video is good, but primarily focuses on Ember 1.0. I wanted to talk about the state of testing Ember now in 2.0, and in what ways it's changed, in my opinion, for the better. So why do we test? I remember reading about this mishap in 2003. Feel free to look up NOAA 19 on Wikipedia. It's a multi-million-dollar spacecraft that fell over and was damaged. The root cause was traced back to two different groups of people, one who removed a set of low-tech bolts, and another group who didn't check to see that the bolts had been removed. Even though both groups had procedures to how to deal with the bolts and what to do with the bolts. The point I took away from the mishap is humans have a hard time doing the same steps over and over again. Practice is good, but after a while, complacency steps in. So what can we do? I say ask a computer to do some heavy lifting for us. So let's talk about EmberTest. I think EmberTest is cool because it's easy to use. Everything I want to test is just available for me to use. No additional heavy frameworks. If I want an alternative, I can use an alternative, something like Chai or Mocha. But if not, it's no big deal. It's very simple. Once I start understanding what I could test with each kind of test, I just fell into a rhythm and then just started testing. It's fast. Often what I'll do is when I'm doing development is I'll run an Ember test server in the background while I'm working on features and while I'm making changes to see if other things break. So I'll just basically continually run my test suite, and as I make changes, it'll just go through and do those tests for me. Ember has three kinds of tests: acceptance tests, integration tests, and unit tests. Each kind of test is very important, critical, and serves a different function. Acceptance tests involve visiting a screen, clicking, and routing. Integration tests ensure a contract at integration points. And unit tests involve algorithmic complexity. Integration tests are a little bit more than a unit test, but a little bit less than an acceptance test. I use each of them in different ways. If I'm trying to find out what functionality I need to build, I'll generate an acceptance test. If I'm trying to test out how something renders or how it will behave in the case of a simple user interaction, I'll use an integration test. If I'm trying to test something very simple with no rendering involved, I'll use a unit test. Acceptance tests I use to visit pages and then perform the clicks on the pages. Integration tests I can also use for doing clicks and stuff like that, but inside the context of just a single Ember component. I also tend to generate tests in about the same amount as the area in the diagram. Integration tests for breadth and depth, a small amount for unit tests, and an acceptance test to kind of cover over the top. Oh, hold on, sorry, hit the wrong button. So I wanted to talk about, this is a little bit more than an intro, but if you want to check out an intro, I would say check out the awesome Ember tutorial. The examples that I have in here are mostly based on the amazing Ember tutorial with some extensions I've added in. But first here, I want to start off in the right place. Who here has done the Ember tutorial? All right, great. If you haven't, that's fine. If you have, there should also be some good information for you as well. Also, I did a quick pull request. Thanks, Dave Baker, for helping me with my pull request there to get things upgraded to Ember 2.12. That was awesome. Most of the code samples are available actually in the repo I put here, which is just a fork of the Super Rentals application. So let's get started. So we're going to talk about unit test first. This is a unit test. It's small functionality related to non-UI rendering. It's fast and focused. This is a great basic example. Checking the before model works as you expected by replacing the method replace with based on your own method. Duck typing at its best. Not much has changed from Ember 1.0 for unit tests, except for a little bit of ES6 syntax. But overall, it's kept the same basic look and feel. The imports, as far as I can tell, are the biggest change from ES6 in this particular case. Also, you'll notice here, it's not working, okay. So this subject, all that basically does is it just creates an instance of the object that you're basically looking at or testing with. So in this case, I'm testing unit route index. And it's basically creating a route index for me and injecting that into the test itself. And then all I do is I basically replace the method, and then I just call the method before model to verify that it works. Our admin tool, so creating more complex tests with transforms. Our admin tool has to display all times in Eastern time zone. It's a requirement of our particular application. We have to do them all in Eastern time, no matter what browser time we're actually looking at. Everything being in Eastern time zone makes our application more complicated, since we can't really change the browser. We use this great library called Moment.js. If you've done other JavaScript framework work, you may have heard of Moment.js. Highly recommend it if you're trying to do complicated date time manipulation. We often store moment objects instead of data objects inside of our models, so we don't have to worry about issues related to time zones or time zone changes. Early on, we discovered an issue when transforming from our date time string to a moment. If we passed in null objects, it tended to not be happy with that. And so I had to build a transform to explicitly check for that and handle the nulls. And so basically what I did was I generated a unit test to basically capture that particular set of scenario, that transform going from a moment, some sort of external data, into a moment and back again. Let's talk about integration tests. So integration tests are designed to be more synchronous tests versus, say, something like an acceptance test. And what I mean by synchronous tests is I mean that when you go through and read them, that it's really kind of doing the same process as you're seeing it, which is a little different than acceptance test, which I'll get into in a little bit. Integration tests focus on interactions, clicks, and whatnots. They're my go-to tests when I've got a graphical component that I'm trying to build up in Ember. Also, one of the things I would note here, especially, is the before each. So if you've got a bunch of different tests and you want to do the same kind of process before each test gets called, you use a before each function to basically call a same set of information before each set of tests. And there's also an after each if you have to do some level of cleanup as well. The other part here is if you look down here to the render method, you've got the HBS, and that's just syntactic sugar for being able to pass in any sort of HTML bars style message into the method. You can render anything you want. Getting used to the fact that you're kind of rendering a component inside the actual instance here can cause some significant confusion, or did cause some significant confusion with me when I originally learned this. One of the things I want to point out to you is the fact that they have rental equals rental object, and then up above, when you've got this set, you do rental object, and you're passing in some particular object for that. And so the key thing is you don't want to get confused where what the object is that you're actually setting it being inside of here. And then as you can see from the example here, all we're really doing at this point is pulling out based on the classes for the component here, the values of each particular one. So as you can see up above, we have, like, for instance, an owner is called a test owner, type is called the test type, city is called test city, and down below I'm basically checking, okay, did the string test owner show up in that particular text? Did the test type show up in that particular text? Did the test city show up for that particular type? Did we have the right number of bedrooms, which is what we'd expect? So the other thing that's a great use for is based on user interactions. We have a relatively complex component that goes through and has a lot of interactions that happen over the course of the component. There's a lot of different places that you can click. to start and stop a blackout, for instance. And we have several large integration. We have basically a large set of integration tests to basically check to make sure that all of the different ways that the user can click the operation actually work correctly. So they set up user interaction clicks. And what I want to do is I want to make sure that I can test the lowest possible surface area when I'm doing my tests versus something like an acceptance test that would say the whole page didn't render correctly. I just want to make sure that if I make a small change to this little component that I've got, this complex component that I've got, I can verify that that never changes. So, one of the other things that you have to work with sometimes with components is services when working with components. If any of the components use a service when you test, and the service doesn't exist, the service does not exist inside the test itself. And so that's something where you have to basically set up this injection capability. So basically what you'll do is you'll create some custom component, and it'll have some sort of Ember service running inside of it, talking to it, allowing for information to be passed into the component itself. And what you can do is that you can basically generate a registration and inject the service in there. And as you'll notice here, all the service is really doing at this point is just a stub. It's just some way of basically being able to generate some fake data that you want the actual component to display. And it is very critical that you do that, because if you don't, code can potentially break in unexpected ways. Here's another example of a component. And as I was saying before, we use a lot of time zones and have to worry about time zone information. And so one of the things that we actually do is we create a sort of mock moment service that has all of our current time zone inside of it as one particular thing. And as you can see here, there's no real complexity in that thing. It's just a simple string that we return back on it. Whereas up above, we do, for this particular component, we'll do slices of day time that we're looking at. So we're looking at one particular day, seeing what things are blacked out. And then we may switch to another day inside the test. And so we want to be able to do some basic level of query logic to verify that I'm looking at day today, or I'm looking at tomorrow, that it behaves correctly in the way we're expecting it to do. So let's talk about acceptance tests. Acceptance tests do a lot. All acceptance tests are asynchronous. And what I'm going to cover here is all of the helpers that you use to be able to really build acceptance tests. Really, there are two kinds of helpers. One which are asynchronous, what to do, and one which are synchronous, what do we see. Examples of asynchronous helpers are things like click, fill in, generate a key event, trigger an event, visit a page, that kind of stuff. And synchronous helpers are, once you've got there, querying the information like the current path, the current route name, what's my URL, find a particular component or label on the particular screen. And then there's the and then, which basically what it does is it allows you to exercise these synchronous helpers after you get through doing a set of operations. Let me show you an example, and hopefully that'll make it more clear. So this is an example of doing something as simple as I want to visit, so for the first test here, I want to visit /. And based on that, I'm going to redirect to another page. And so all I need to do is just select a visit, present visit, and then the and then, which I'm basically saying, okay, once I've visited, I want you to check this piece of information. It basically waits for the previous operation to complete before stopping. The way it's been explained to me, and I think it's a good way to explain it, is each one of these operations is like a little promise that says, do this, do this, do this, do this. And then when you hit the end then, it just simply adds another promise on that says, do these things after all of the other steps that you've done beforehand have been taken care of. The same thing with the next one. So let's say we want to click to a link about page. I visit to the main page. I look for a link that has an about on it. And then after that click has happened, then I want to check to make sure that the URL is about, that we've transitioned to the new location. If you don't do the end then, it'll actually come back with, no, I'm not at about, because it actually hasn't navigated at that point. So just because you say visit doesn't mean you've actually transitioned to there when you actually execute that line of code. Can't stress that enough. That's one of those things that is a real, once you learn how it works and you see it in practice, it makes it much easier to understand. But it is definitely a learning curve that you have to work through. Okay. Let's talk about some common problems with acceptance tests. Where does data come from? So I use Ember or Mirage for most of my data. This is an important distinction between integration tests versus acceptance tests. With an integration test, I'll normally just generate an object and throw it into the component. On the other hand, Ember or Mirage is a great way to store lots of data into it and data for our tests. When I was looking at the Ember tutorial and kind of prepping for this particular presentation, I learned some very interesting tricks about how to feed in custom data. But I could do a whole lightning talk about different ways of using Ember data, Ember Mirage data. So I'm not sure how to get around with a lot of issues with and thens. Also, don't nest and thens. It doesn't do what you expect. But it's okay for an and then to occur between asynchronous helpers. That's actually fine. And actually, that's a real common way of kind of dealing with this particular problems. So if you are new to unit tests completely, I recommend these 2 YouTube videos as well. I've covered some details of it. There are also some great resources as well. This is the one that Ben did. And then also there's another one from a gentleman from Yahoo, Mike Narth, who's Test Like a Pro with Ember JavaScript. And it's also a very good one as well. And he covers a lot of the same kinds of details that I covered, but in different ways. So thank you so much.
Hours of videos. My distinct pleasure to introduce you to somebody who's a very good friend of mine, about to be a very good friend of yours. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Ben Miller. While I was getting set up, there was something that, so as long as it's EmberConf, I've gone to the testing ones. That's been rolling around my head for the last couple of weeks. Infected. What's test infected mean? Who knows? The common phrase people use, let's test infected. So, I am proud to be able to introduce into your lexicon the term test infected. So test infected is when you switch from testing is a thing that I have to do to testing is a thing that I can't imagine developing without. And I feel like personally in the last 2 weeks I crossed that threshold from something where I'm ticking a box to I don't feel very good about running this another test. And like the big change happens when you realize you've been doing test-driven development your entire life. You do it with console logs. You do it with checking the output. But the difference between using automated tests and that is that as soon as you're done, all of your tests go away because you're not writing console logs anymore. You're not checking the page every time, or that becomes so onerous that it's impossible to do that every time. And the only difference is you switch over to having a machine check all of those things for you. And so I am proud to admit that I am now test infected. It really is delightful. And to the newer people in the audience, I will tell you also, like I have read in the last 4 months in particular, like every book on testing I can get my hands on. And it's not just a matter of like, oh yeah, a test. You need to learn the testing framework, which is its own thing, worth time investment. Please put the time into doing that also. And the thing that's the weirdest about testing, that was the biggest shocker to me, is it's a different way to write your applications. It has way more to do with your application architecture than it does your tests. Because if you find yourself in a situation where you go, how would I test this? Like, that has to do with how you structure your application. Like, the tests are easy to write. Writing an application that is testable is much more difficult. And Ember has so many scenes that you can tap into to make those tests a little bit easier. So that was my experience with that. How about one more round of applause for Mr. Ben Lemon?
So quickly before I get started, my goal with this talk is to basically run you through 16 hours of talks in about 40 minutes. And my goal with it is basically we're going to go over kind of like the keynote, which is a good explanation of like where Ember's coming from and where it's going in the next year or so. And then I'm going talk by talk over every single talk, some of which were super high level and not really related specifically to Ember, some of which were not related directly to technology and otherwise. And so it's a good idea if you guys have like a phone with a notes app or like a notebook or something. My goal with this is to give like quick little bite-sized information about each talk. There's a link to these slides with links to every single video. And my goal with this is to give you like enough information to decide whether or not you want to watch each talk. And some of it is like not even specifically related to Ember. So make sure that you have something to write with or just jot down mental notes. So yeah, I'm gonna start by going over the Ember community survey, then go to the keynote and then talk by talk. So the Ember community survey is something they do every year before EmberConf. This year it had about 1,600 responses. And I pulled some of the interesting pieces out that I found particularly interesting. At the very end, there's a link to all of these results. There's some cool visualizations and stuff if you guys want to take a look at it. I thought this was pretty interesting. Breakdown of Ember use by version. So Ember releases on a 6-week release cycle. So every 6 weeks, we release a new version. Every 4th version, we deem long-term support. So if you're working with, say, a client or at a company that doesn't have time to upgrade every 6 weeks, there's a long-term support version that will be supported for a lot longer than just 6 weeks for critical security fixes, that kind of thing. And so I thought this was pretty interesting. You can see around here, around 2.4, there were quite a few people using that. 2.8 was the next LTS, and you see a big jump. But then you also see this really big jump of use around 2.11 and 2.12. And we'll talk about that a little bit more, but that was probably caused by Glimmer, which is the Glimmer 2, the new rendering engine that came out. So lots of people are actually using LTS versions. It was something that came out last year at EmberConf. They announced they were going to start doing this LTS versioning. But a lot of people are also keeping up to date. How can we improve Ember was sort of like a freeform question that they ran through natural language processing and pulled out like common things that people were talking about. Performance, everybody was pretty much commenting on how they could improve Ember by improving performance, and there's a lot to talk about there. Documentation and guide improvement requests, which there was a great lightning talk that David and Todd gave about improvements to guides and a few other things. I thought this one was really interesting. How long have you been working with Ember? almost half of the survey participants had been using Ember for over 2 years, with a pretty new, relatively new framework like Ember it was interesting that people who liked it kind of stuck with it. And you can really see how that's changed between 2015, 16, and 17. How many people use your apps? I thought this was cool. Like, most are actually targeting hundreds or thousands of users. The ones targeting millions of users are probably the LinkedIns and the PlayStation and those kind of apps. But it's a pretty widespread. Like, people are using it for small projects. Some are using it for really large projects. What does your server stack look like? So that big one on the far left, sorry, this is a little small, is Ruby. Then JavaScript, Java, PHP, Python. Pretty interesting that convention, I'm assuming that a lot of the Ruby stuff is Ruby on Rails, and that kind of makes sense because Ember is a convention over configuration framework similar to Ruby on Rails. And then JavaScript, obviously, like, people are interested in running the same thing on the back and front end. So I thought that was pretty interesting. And there's a lot more available on this if you want to check out the community survey. So the keynote, this is a great summary of what happened since the last EmberConf and what's next. So the speakers here are Yehuda Katz and Tom Dale. Yehuda is on pretty much every core team you could imagine. Ember, Ruby on Rails, jQuery, Yarn, Handlebars, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And Tom is sort of the, Rust is not on there. That's one of the et ceteras. Yeah. And then Tom, who's on the Ember core team. So if you've ever seen the little Tomster hamster-looking guy, that's based after Tom Dale. And all of this is available. There's links to all these videos if you want to watch them. So the main topics I want to talk about that I thought were interesting are things that went well in the 2.x release. Yehuda went into this really deep dive on Glimmer, the new rendering engine, which I'll try to go up a little bit, go up a level, and just kind of talk about what makes the new version of Glimmer interesting. Things that didn't go well in 2.x, and that kind of leads into what the future of Ember looks like. So what went well, fast boot, engines, and Glimmer were the things that went really well since the last EmberConf. So with a single page application, if you curl that and say you're not running, or you're in your browser and you're not running JavaScript, you don't actually see any content because JavaScript has to run to. So fast boot is something that allows server-side pre-rendering of your application, so you can actually see content of what JavaScript is rendering, and then it loads that JavaScript in afterwards to provide you with like the full single-page app experience. That's gone really well. A lot of people are using it. Engines, similar to Rails engines, if you've ever used them before, it allows you to isolate different pieces of code and mount different pieces of code into your Ember app when it's needed. So imagine you have a website that registers users, but also has like a bunch of administrative stuff once that user's logged in. Well, if you're just trying to, if the customer is just going to your page to see your homepage and isn't necessarily registering or doesn't necessarily need all the administrative stuff, why load that when they first look at the page and slow it down? So engines went really well. You can mount on the administrative stuff as you need it. And then Glimmer went really well. It's a performant rendering engine that was pretty much drop-in compatible with existing Ember apps that people had built. So Glimmer is the third iteration of the rendering engine used by Ember. So it started off with handlebars, moved to HTML bars, then Glimmer, now Glimmer 2. One of the big announcements was that the Glimmer rendering engine is now available as a standalone called Glimmer.js. And Glimmer 2 is a drop-in replacement for Ember applications. So a lot of people compare Ember to React. Like, a lot of people talk about, like, you know, Ember is so much bigger than React, or it's, you know, slower than React or whatever. What's different about it is that Ember is a lot more than just a rendering engine. That's what React is just a rendering engine. So if you think about how Ember compares to this, Glimmer is sort of the React piece of Ember. And they've split that out. So if you just want the rendering engine, you don't want routing, and you don't want Ember data and services and all these other pieces, you can just have the component piece in Glimmer.js. So this is a video that I dropped in. They played this at the keynote. In the interest of time, I'm not going to play it right now, but it's a great 5-minute intro. This is Tom Dale. He talked through a very simple component, and you can kind of easily see what the difference between Ember components and Glimmer components are. So I highly recommend, if you're interested in Glimmer, take a look at this video. Glimmer specifics for this slide's kind of targeted at people who have used Ember before. There's no more root attribute. So when you created an Ember component, you sort of had this wrapper that was sort of automatically generated by Ember around the outside. So you'd have to specify in the component, like your tag should be a button or your tag should be an input or whatever, as opposed to just defining that in the template. Now with Glimmer, the template is the root, so you don't have to have all that information about templating within your JavaScript. It uses true ES6 class syntax. The entire thing is written with TypeScript, which is pretty interesting and different for a lot of folks. And it uses true ES6 getters and setters, so you don't have to do this.get foo, this.set foo, which is pretty interesting. The Glimmer performance, Glimmer is quite a bit more performant. I've got some slides in just a second to talk about to compare to other frameworks. But the big change they made that really boosted performance in Glimmer 2 is an ahead of time wire format to describe DOM app operations. So when you're deploying your application, it's generating these template files that uses a very slim wire format. And so this is essentially what it looks like. But it actually is a binary format once it's actually running within Glimmer. So at the top there, it's like open element H1, flush the element, append the title, close the element. So in that format, it's telling the rendering engine what exactly to do to build the page that you've described. And then their goal with it is to boot up fast and save fast once booted. So they originally showed some benchmarks that they made a point that a lot of the benchmarks that you see comparing different frameworks are not necessarily realistic. Like it's just a body with an H1 on it or something super, super simple that you can optimize your framework for, but it's not really realistic for what people are building with a real web app. So this is kind of like a simple hello world application. So with a single page framework, you've kind of got two different things to think about with a rendering engine. Is the first render, when someone directly visits your page and there's nothing on the page yet, known as the initial render, and then subsequent updates as people are doing things on your site and different DOM elements appear and disappear, is called an update. So you want it to boot up fast, you want that initial render to be fast, but you also want updates to be fast as well. So here you've got Glimmer, Preact, React, and Inferno. Glimmer does pretty well. It's faster on the initial render than Preact. Inferno is slightly faster, but all of these are looking pretty solid. But where Glimmer really shines is on DOM content updates. It's at around 2 to 3 milliseconds on the re-render versus Preact or React or Inferno. So when you hear people talking about, React is so much faster or whatever, now with Glimmer, Glimmer 2, it's actually, they're all very similar. They're all pretty darn fast. So what is the future of Glimmer and Ember? I think this is what a lot of people were thinking during the keynote is like, all right, well, I've got I work for a company that's really bought into Ember. So what does this mean for us? Like, are we going to have to rewrite everything as Glimmer? Or what does that look like? And I threw some quotes in there that I thought were pretty interesting. This is basically the component API that they want for Ember. Ember is still the choice for big web applications, and Glimmer is sort of the choice for, they said, for small mobile apps that need to be very performant. There's also a case to use this on like a server rendered application. So if you need some rich content within like a server rendered page, something that's rendered by Rails or something, Glimmer might be a good choice for you. So what did not go well? Communication was like the big theme here. There were a lot of, as Kyle mentioned earlier, it's a very community-driven framework, and there's a lot of discussion in the open about how we want to progress the framework. But once RFCs got approved, I think one of the big issues with Ember 2 was describing, here's how you prepare yourself for these changes that are coming, or here's the current status of this new feature that we've approved and we're talking about. So some example things were like angle bracket components, which we're supposedly going to land right at the beginning of Ember 2, routable components, pods, etc. If you've worked in Ember for a while, you've heard these terms, and you might not know what these are. What they talked about was, as opposed to really making sure that they plan out the entire feature and like land it and it's just right, they've talked about sort of unlocking experimentation via a small kernel with hooks. So as opposed to having Ember do everything the perfect way, like right in the beginning, the idea is to provide the hooks that add-on authors might need to drop in a proof of concept and say, this is what, here's what this idea looks like, and some early adopters can try it out and test it out before everybody else sort of moves over to it. And sort of related to Derek's talk there, they've done this with Ember native DOM helpers, which is sort of like the next generation testing syntax, which you can use in your application today. And once things are drop-in compatible, consider merging them upstream. So I thought this was really, really interesting. If you're paying attention to any slides, I think this is one of the most interesting ones, is the future of Ember. So the idea is that most apps will probably start with just Glimmer, and you'll sort of NPM install your way up to the entire full-featured Ember framework as we know it today. So if you're, say, starting at a startup and you guys need a marketing page to explain what your company is, you might not need routing and service and Ember data and like all these different pieces. You might just start with something like Glimmer. But as you need to make your application more complex, you can add in the official community supported things like routing and service and Ember data, and you sort of like install your way up to the full featured framework. And different than, say, like, React or some of the other frameworks, these are going to be official community supported. So like when you look at data flow or routing, you don't have 20 different choices. It's sort of like, this is the way to go. This is the Ember community way of doing this. So this is another sort of interesting slide. This sort of shows the base hello world in each of the different frameworks, how large the payloads are. So you can see Ember down there, nearly 200 kilobytes. It's quite a bit. Angular, the next one up is React, Vue.js, Glimmer.js, and then Preact up there at 8.8. So Glimmer is very small and very fast to get something up and running. Does anybody have any questions about the stuff I went through in the keynote? Again, if you want to know more about this, I would go watch the video, but happy to take any questions before we jump into the talk by talk explanation. All right. So talk by talk. First talk was called Going Progressive with Ember by Samantha De Barros. She works at YWorks in Uruguay. It was really interesting. This was an interesting talk about what is a progressive app, and the idea is to sort of provide native app-like functionality within a web app. And she described this as the app looking good, it installs on the device, so similar to like an app you download from the App Store, it might take a second to load the first time, you might download it to your phone, but the second time you launch it, it's really quick, it might have some cache data because it works offline and it's fast. So I would watch this talk if you're interested in any of these terms that I have up here: app manifest, app cache, service worker, local forage, or offline web apps. Or if you want to build a simple application, you're learning web development, but you don't necessarily want to learn like React Native or Swift or Java, and you want to make something that can actually like install on people's phone and work sort of like a native mobile application, this is a talk to definitely take a look at. Casey Watts is an engineer at Heroku. He has a background in software and psychology. So he is working as an engineer, but has a background in psychology. And his talk was called A Neurobiologist's Guide to Mind Manipulation. It was a talk talking about how to improve sort of processing emotions, processing thoughts, interacting effectively with your coworkers. It was not a super technical talk. It was more focused around common things that you might run into working on an engineering team and sort of how to improve how you react to different kinds of situations. There was a bunch of cool resources that he provided, like, things to avoid, like all or nothing thinking, like I have to do it perfect or I'm not going to do it at all. Overgeneralizing, like, everything I write in Ember is crap, and some different ways to work through those kinds of thoughts. It was pretty interesting, and if you're not, if you're looking for something maybe a little less technical or more on the psychology side, this was definitely one to watch. And if you're interested in that term, cognitive restructuring, it was pretty cool. Next was Godfrey Chan. He is a core team member on Ruby on Rails and on the Ember core team. He was talking about understanding performance within your applications. He also has the Canada gem, which if you've ever used Rails before, it's pretty good. I think my favorite is aboot object.io. It's pretty good. But he discusses how you can debug performance at the different layers where you might be experiencing performance problems in your code. So, code that you've written, things that are not performant, things that might not be performant in the framework, so like within Ember or React or Angular or whatever you're working in, and all the way down to specifics on how to debug in the parser, like within V8, how you can actually find where de-optimizations are occurring. It got pretty deep into that, but it definitely taught me some more about how to profile performance of a given application. So if you're interested in debugging performance in JavaScript and you don't know where to start, this is a great one to watch. If you've seen the performance tab in Chrome DevTools and you have no idea what it is, this is a good one to watch. And if you're curious about how V8 works, it's pretty good. So Ingrid was up next. She talked about counterspells and the art of keeping your applications safe. She is a full stack engineer at EmberConf in Scotland. And if you notice, I thought this year was really good because there was a large international representation. So it was a really diverse group of people. She discusses how to use browser content security policy to mitigate cross-site scripting. So if you're building a front-end web application, cross-site scripting is always one of the things that you need to think about as far as security goes. How could a hacker potentially make your web app insecure? She talked about the dangers of HTML safe. So if you don't know about that, this is definitely one to watch. Using helpers to sanitize HTML content. So a lot of her concepts were around if you allow a user to input something that is then rendered on another page, there's always a chance that they could be malicious and render some kind of script or something malicious that could affect other users and change how your web app works. So it was definitely some really solid strategies to use if you are accepting user input and you need to know how to sanitize it. She also talked about this OWASP top 10 list, which is sort of the top 10 front-end security vulnerabilities across all frameworks, which I had never heard of. That was pretty cool. So if you want to know about securing a front-end application, if you're an Ember dev and you're using the triple stash, so instead of just two curlies in your templates, you're using triple stashes, that is going potentially opens up the chance to render user input that could open you up to a cross-site scripting attack. And if you're just unfamiliar with common attacks on web apps, that's a good one to watch. Rebuilding Tumblr is a single page app. Ollie he's an engineer at Tumblr. He talked through, so Tumblr is not an Ember app. It was basically, they tried to see if they could rewrite it in Ember as part of a hack day. They created a proof of concept in Ember and in React, and they said it was so much easier without experience in either framework to get started with Ember because of the community support and the add-ons. And so this talk, it wasn't super technical, but I think what I took from it was that it's really a testament to the community. And if you're not super familiar, or you're new to web app development in general, that Ember is a great choice. There were several talks on animation. This one was by Jessica Jordan. She is a biologist turned front-end engineer. Animate the Web with JS was the name of her talk. And she talked through how to create this kind of cool animated comic in Ember. So she talked through keyframe animation and using the web animation API to basically build this. I'm nowhere near as artistically inclined as she is, but it's pretty cool if you're into drawing or interested in motion graphics or anything. This is a pretty cool talk to watch. Also, if you're doing stuff with Canvas or you've heard of the web animation API, this is a great one. Data loading patterns with JSON API. So Balint talked through this. He's a consultant in Budapest. He discusses the basics of Ember Data's API. So if you've never used Ember Data before, this is a good talk to take a look at. He talks about different data fetching strategies. So, how to lazy fetch certain data, how to preload certain data that you know that you're going to need, side loading, searching, sorting, pagination. So I would definitely watch this one if you're new to Ember Data. If you're a backend engineer and you're learning or you're trying to figure out how to expose certain data to a front-end API, he talks through different concepts to think about. If you've never used JSON API before, he talks through the basics of how JSON API is formatted. He also talks through server-side sorting, searching, and pagination. which was pretty relevant, especially as Ibotta moves to more server-side sorting searching. Higher order components. So this is Miguel Camba. He's a Ember, Ruby, and Elixir consultant. This presentation was really, really good. He built an entire NES style game where he was walking around and talking to different core team members, and at one point had a battle with the creator of React. It was really good.
It was like a stream of inside jokes.
Yeah,
from the Ember community, just for the entire duration.
It was really good. I don't really know what he used to build it, but it was really awesome.
It was Unity. It was the same kind of mic drops that the Torn Bells TV talk was, or what was the one last year? There's another one that was like that, but it was a holy fuck, what am I watching?
Yeah, it was good. But he talks about how to utilize contextual components. So there were a lot of new helpers in Ember 2 that help to build composable components using things like the yield, hash, and component helpers. He starts to build a component that is something that you could really easily relate to. You could see wanting to build. It was essentially a little checkbox with different kinds of labels, and he kind of played the developer with the product designer who's oh, now it needs to, I need to be able to change the color, or the label needs to be on this side versus the other side. And they started building it out by putting a bunch of different flags, label position as a variable, left or right. And it's a common trap that I feel even very experienced developers can fall into. And he talked through how to build that using composability concepts, which I thought was a great reminder. So if you want to learn about how to build clean Ember components, if you're unfamiliar with composability concepts in Ember, and if you're interested in learning more about how to break out the actual logic from the presentational components, this is a good one. Also, if you use Ember and you've never used a yield, hash, or component helper before, this is a great one to watch. And also a shameless plug, I gave a presentation on composability a few months ago that you can watch if you're interested in this as well. So that was the end of day one. We're almost there. I know this is a lot of information. Any questions on any of these other topics? Should we keep chugging? Keep chugging. All right.
I would say at the end of the first night, when I sent my wife, was a picture of the cool after party on day one, which was about 5 or 6 of us sitting around a table working on Ember apps at that bar on top of the hotel. It was a lot of this and a lot less of.
The presentations, are they going to be posted online? Are they
Yep.
online?
They are.
Yep. So at the beginning of all of these, there's a link to the videos. This was, the game that he made, but also I linked to slides too. So if you're not into watching videos, there's a lot of good resources. Also, Lauren Tan has a really good README. I think it's called her GitHub username is Potito, P-O-T-E-T-O, and it's EmberConf 27 recap. It has a ton of great links as well, and I used a lot of that for this.
There's a playlist on YouTube, all videos.
So the start of day 2 started off with Edward Faulkner, who he's your spirit animal, right, Kyle?
Yes.
Okay.
Oh my god, and he followed me. After you said that, Edward Faulkner is following me on Twitter. Oh! It's the best outcome of the entire.
So he kicked off day 2. So he's an Ember core team member. He created Liquid Fire, which is Ember's community-supported animation library. So Ember has this add-on called Liquid Fire, which allows you to automatically do transition animations between different routes. It's awesome, and he's sort of on to the next thing called Card Stack, which is particularly interesting if you are working on a project where you don't need to, you're not going to be creating all the content. You're basically you need some sort of CMS, which is really common. So his mission with Card Stack is to build a card ecosystem based on open web technologies and open source ethos that fights back against rampant lock-in. So basically, this is the idea behind Card Stack, is that you users who are probably not developers. They might be, content creators like marketers or technical writers or something like that. They author their cards within your Ember application that you build with card stack on top of it. And that content is persisted either via SCM like Git, like through a CMS like Drupal, or via a custom app that maybe you're running on Amazon or Google Cloud or whatever. And then those cards get rendered out using Ember, HTML5, CSS3, JavaScript, and use the server side to load this app. The idea, this might be a little bit confusing, but basically what they're doing is they're providing an Ember front end on top of a CMS like Drupal. So as opposed to having to have everybody build something out within Drupal and it's all rendered there, you can sort of use the power of Ember to do what it's good at in receiving that information from Drupal and displaying it, and having all of the animations provided by Liquid Fire or anything else you're doing within Ember, but then leaving the content persistence and creation to something that's really good at that, like Drupal. So yeah, it allows you to use the CMS like Drupal for data persistence. It allows a web developer to set up the template for the page, but then allows non-technical users to edit the content in line. It also can you leverage Git to preview changes? So they're very focused on not using technical terms that might turn off people who are non-technical. So instead of calling it a branch, they call it a preview. So two people can be working on a Git branch, not really know it, but see that they're previewing changes that they're, maybe it's two different marketers working on a press release or something like that. They can work collaboratively on it, preview it within the context of the real production application, and then hit publish, which essentially does a merge and a deploy of that, so they can do all the content authoring, and you as the developer don't get a please create this PR page request. They're empowered to do everything on their own. It also will eventually leverage Elasticsearch for full text search on content automatically. It's really, really interesting. So if you're interested in building an app that will be frequently edited or appended after you deliver it, so like if you're a consultant that's working on something and you're gonna hand it off, but they still need to create different content on it, this is very relevant to you. And if you're curious about how to leverage a CMS to drive the content of an Ember app, this is something really interesting to watch. So this is another one of the animation talks. This was Jen Weber. She's a UI UX developer at BioBright. They make software to be used in labs by different types of scientists. She discusses how to create an SVG-driven component, how to make SVG more accessible, and how to optimize SVGs. So at least in my experience, when I've worked with SVGs, I get an SVG from a designer and I drop it in. Like that's all I actually do with it. But an SVG can actually be defined in real time by a component, which is what Jen was talking about and what she's actually using Ember to do is a scientist can enter in certain information about their experiment, and she can actually use that input to generate an image that will help them to conduct the experiment appropriately, which is pretty cool. So if you're interested in optimization, creation, or animation of SVGs, this is one to watch. Mastering Ember from the perspective of a noob. This was Madison, who actually has attended this meetup quite a bit. She went to Turing School.
She did this talk here like 2 months ago.
Yeah, she was the headliner a couple months ago. She just got a job at Techstars up in Boulder, but she talked through the challenges of learning Ember as a self-proclaimed noob. She came to one of these talks, and even the beginner talk, she felt super underwater and didn't understand what a lot of the concepts were, and she was like, I was totally lost. But she talked about how some strategies that she used to try to understand Ember a little bit better, talked through the Dreyfus model, which I hear is something that Kyle likes to talk about quite a bit, and how you move through skill acquisition from being a novice to competent to proficient to expertise to being a master. So if you're interested in hearing the challenges of approaching a framework with no dev background, which I think is pretty relevant to a lot of people in this room, definitely take a look at this talk. And if you want to learn more about the Dreyfus model, she actually goes pretty deep into it. State time and concurrency, Alex Machnier. So he is an emeritus core team member. He works for a company called Future Proof Retail. He is the author of Ember Concurrency. So he talked through that the fact that the user is sort of an async operation, and you need to think about that as you're building your web application. He talks through a lot of very specific things with Ember Concurrency, and I think the reason I started this is that he talks a ton about utilizing derived state from tasks. So you have flags in your code where you start to fire a promise, and you set a flag called isSaving, and then in your finally block from your promise, you're setting like isSending is false. Ember Concurrency can really help you here because there's a lot of derived state that it gets from active promises. So if you should watch this talk if you have flags in your code like isSending that you're managing manually. If you're not familiar with Ember Concurrency at all, if you never used it, you should watch this talk. The fourth dimension of async tasks, which is time, which is kind of an interesting topic, and then if you're curious why the user is an async operation, watch this talk. Confessions of an Ember add-on author, Lauren Tan. She has spoken for, I think this was her third year speaking. She's a really great speaker. She's an engineer at Netflix. She talks about what, generally speaking, makes a good open source project. The things that I pulled out that resonated with me is that it solves a useful problem and that people are convinced that it's the best solution for their problem. It provides a good developer experience, a good documentation, some kind of demo, good testing, clear instructions. So I liked the concept of the developer experience with this one. So if you have or are considering open sourcing a project, you want to know more about how an Ember add-on is built, she talks about all the different hooks that are available and how to build an add-on. This was a good one to watch. Okay, lightning talks, and I'm gonna go really fast through these because there's a lot of them. So first was Magnum API, Adventures in Docs, which David and Todd did. They're both on the Learning Core team. Yeah. There are now versioned API docs for Ember. So this was a big comment in the Ember community survey is like, I'm on 2.8 LTS, but all the docs are for 2.12. I'm not on 2.12. How do I know what to use? So thanks to their hard work, there are now versioned API docs for Ember. They explain how the new infrastructure for docs works, and there's also search. There's a link here to the beta. Are the docs still in beta? Okay, yep, so you can check out the beta docs there. So if you're curious about the architecture or the future of the Ember.js website in general, that was a good one. Ember plus VR, bring your A-frame. Kelly Selden, he's an engineer at classmates.com. He talks about using the A-frame library for VR. He basically created an Ember app that you can use with like VR headsets, which was really cool. So if you're interested in VR technologies, this is a good like 5-minute talk to pique your interest in it. Baby's first open source project, Liz Bailey, she's an engineer at Tilde. She wanted to build an open source project from scratch, but she didn't know how to do it. So she got in touch with this group called the Degenderettes. And her talk was less about the app specifically and more about how the Ember community is so willing to help her. Like she would get stuck and then pair with people in London, and just like there were people who are so willing to help. So if you want to start your own open source project and you want to learn strategies for recruiting others to help you with it, watch this talk. What's new in QUnit? Trent Willis, he's the lead maintainer for QUnit. QUnit is the default testing framework that Ember uses. So they announced QUnit CLI, which allows you to use QUnit for node testing, not just browser testing, which was a big new thing. QUnit to-do test, which allows errors within partially implemented features. So a lot of people have probably used skip this test because I haven't written the code yet. To-do tests actually allow you to define like there's certain things that are failing, but not the whole test. So you can write a test that partially fails and then continue to work at it till it's just a regular test. And new assertion types, order-dependent test with step is pretty cool. So if you need to test that this thing happens, but not before this other thing happens, you can actually define the order in which assertions must run, which is pretty cool. So if you have a project that uses QUnit or you want to use QUnit for node projects, watch this one. Instrumenting Ember apps with Heimdall. This was Chris Thoburn, who's more well-known as Runspired. He's an engineer at LinkedIn. This was a lightning talk that lasted about 20 minutes, but he talked through and Robert Jackson was not pleased with him. But anyway, he discussed debugging and monitoring performance in JavaScript apps. So he sort of introduced this new framework called Heimdall to test performance in your applications. And he talked through some of the core concepts of Heimdall, including timers and counters, when to use them. So if you're curious about it, like, I would say start with Godfrey's talk on performance, and then if you want something more in depth, watch this talk. If you want to try Heimdall. And then Daniel talked through TypeScript and Ember. He's a program manager of TypeScript at Microsoft. So he talked through like why you might use TypeScript, why the Glimmer team worked super closely with the TypeScript team on what they needed to use it within Glimmer. He showed some really great examples of the editor and inline help with TypeScript, showing different cases where TypeScript can help you. And he showed the language support in autocomplete, which is pretty cool, and you don't get it with standard JavaScript. So if you've never used TypeScript before, or you're wondering what the hype is with TypeScript, watch this, it's 5 minutes. And that's the end of the lightning talks. So spin me a yarn. This is Serena Frisch. She's also a product engineer at EmberConf. This one was not related specifically to Ember at all, but she was talking through Yarn, which is a replacement for NPM. She started off with a really great joke about Angular and Merkle, which was like so good for me. But she talked through issues with NPM and why they're issues. So NPM actually has a blog post talking about why NPM specifically is non-deterministic. It just is, and why NPM is not as performant. And she talks about how Yarn is different, which in a nutshell is it's consistent, reliable dependency resolution. So if you're working on a team that is not using Yarn yet, you do a deployment and it works from one person's machine when they deploy, but something totally else happens when someone else deploys, Yarn can really help here. I thought this was a really great talk too, because she walked through running an NPM install with a certain package JSON, and then how it works with Yarn, and talked about how it was different. It was a really clear step-by-step explanation of how the two are different. So watch this talk. If you don't know how Yarn is different from NPM, you're not using Yarn, you don't know what Yarn is at all. You want to know why NPM is by definition non-deterministic. She walks through that specifically. And if you want to walk through step by step, which I think is a valuable lesson if you're using NPM. An animated guide to Ember internals, Gavin Joyce. He discussed the fundamental difference between a traditional and a closure action, which we're going to have a deep dive talk about next month. But he talks about how they're fundamentally different. And if you're interested in Glimmer and you want to dive deeper into it, this is a great talk, because he walks through how the Glimmer VM builds and flushes a stack with like really awesome step-by-step animations. So if you want to know more about the wire format or how Glimmer 2 works, this is a really good one to watch. And the closing keynote, finally, we're almost there. So Sarah May, she is the founder of Railsbridge. She's a consultant and developer. This is a really, really great talk. If you're a dev working on a team, if you're in code school and you hope to be working on a team soon, this is a really, really, really good talk to watch. She talked about the code base that we all work in as a home. She said specifically that our code is a place that we all live. And it's not something that is finished ever, just like your house. Like, you don't finish cleaning and then you're just like done cleaning for the rest of your life, right? It should be livable for the people who live there. And it's going to look different depending on the kind of devs who live in a given code base. A code base with 5 junior developers is going to look different than one with 5 senior developers, or a mix of those kinds of developers. It's what makes that place livable is going to vary by the team, and it's something you need to think about. And getting a new team member is like getting a new roommate. They might bring their crappy old couch, but either way, that's going to change what it's like to live there. And I think that this is particularly relevant at my job as we've grown. The engineering team has grown 550% in the past year. So there are a lot of new people in the code base. And I think keeping in mind that getting all these new people in there is like getting a bunch of new roommates, and you need to make the code base livable. She also, throughout her entire talk, kind of brought in this like hoarding parallel, where clutter and problems in a code base appear over time, not all at once. So if you've ever seen that show Hoarders, she had like photos from that show, and she's like, it didn't happen all at once. Like the kitchen wasn't accessible, like totally inaccessible all at once. It sort of happens over time where maybe you don't do the dishes one day, and then you're like, oh well, I can't cook because the stove has dirty dishes on it, so I'll just keep adding stuff on. It's similar with code. You start to pile on the problems, like, oh, I got to get this assignment done, and I don't have time to make it perfect, so I'm just going to keep going. But it's important to sort of clean up as you go. But also cleaning up all at once isn't going to fix the problem. She talked about how that show with hoarders, they come in and they clean up everything at once, but that doesn't really fix the problem. It's the person who's living there who is hoarding all that stuff still has the same issues, right? And it's the same thing with your code base. You can't just be like, this is all crap and I'm just going to rewrite the whole thing and everything will be better, because the people who are living there are not going to change. It's going to end up in the same state. So it's more of a consistent and sort of, it's more of like a people thing than it is a technology thing, which I thought was just a really interesting parallel and not something that I've really thought about before. So she talks about cleaning up tech debt. She suggests doing it piece by piece. It's like cleaning your house, and just make it part of your routine to clean as you go. As you're implementing new features, don't make stuff worse, but value improvement over consistency. Instead of saying, this is how we've always done it, so I'm gonna keep following the same pattern because it's what we do. Value improvement over that consistency to try to make it better over time. And do refactoring in line. Clean up problems as you see it. As you dirty a dish, put the dish into the dishwasher, right? Do this stuff as you go. Dealing with tech debt, she basically said, don't ask for permission. It's part of your job. You don't need to go ask the engineer who's more senior than you, hey, I see this problem and I need to clean it up. It is your job to do it. Don't ask for forgiveness if you are doing something and it ends up to not be the right thing, but do learn every time. Do ask for advice on refactoring, but don't always take the advice if you don't agree with it. And work together because everyone is living within the same code base. So watch this video if you're a developer working on your team, if you're a developer who may someday work on a team, or if you're working for a company that's high growth, because it's really, really relevant. So thank you for listening. I know that's a ton of information, but I hope that this helps you guys to drive, not have to watch like 16 hours worth of talks. Hopefully there's 2 or 3 in here that are really interesting to you that you can watch on 1.5 times speed and get through them quick. So the slides are all available. Everything in yellow is a link. So there's tons of resources in here. So it's bit.ly/EmberConf 2017. You can find me on GitHub at Blimmer. I'm happy to take any questions or thoughts that anybody has. Hopefully it's, yes, Dave?
What was your favorite talk?
What was my favorite talk? I thought Sarah May's talk was really, really good because it was just so relevant to the kind of rapid growth we're going through at Ibotta, and especially with a lot of new people joining the team, I thought it was a really good perspective. I thought the card stack talk was really interesting. I think it's going to be really relevant to Ibotta and to a lot of consultants. Like I think it's so common to build someone like a blog or something that they need to be able to work on over time. And it's not like you just deliver software and you're done with it. Like it always evolves over time. So I thought that was really forward thinking, and it's in good hands with Edward Faulkner. So yeah.
If I go to the Elasticsearch part of
yeah.
you do at all.
Yeah, so Elasticsearch, let's see. So Elasticsearch is not implemented yet, but I know that it is on the roadmap. The idea is that they want it, so the way that it works with like Drupal is that it's saving all the content within Drupal, but it's just using Drupal's JSON API plugin to expose the data to Ember Data, which uses JSON API. I know that the Elasticsearch isn't done quite yet, but the idea is that, so CardStack in sort of the middle has this thing called CardStack Hub, and that's where you start installing the different pieces. Like I want to use Drupal, or I want to use Git, or something else. I think WordPress is going to be supported eventually. But I think the idea is that Elasticsearch would plug into the hub, and then you could start to query full text about the content that's produced by your users, just sort of like automatically. As far as like specifics around how it works. He didn't get into that, but the CardStack page is linked on this. It's really good, and I think technical roadmap. So Drupal is there. CloudStack Cloud JSON API built on AWS is coming soon. Git is already supported. I don't know. Okay, yeah. So card syndication, it's down here. Tunable feed API using Elasticsearch is on their roadmap, so supposedly coming soon.
Yeah, this was my favorite talk for sure. Like, if you've ever worked with CMSs in the past, like WordPress, Drupal, like it's like a completely new paradigm of like building websites. Like it takes everything that enabled like 25% of the internet to be powered by WordPress, like adding on all the awesome stuff we got at Ember, like really dynamic user interfaces, and like marrying the benefits of both of those. So like I work on a website where like half the website's like content that comes from a CMS, and half the website's like really dynamic, data-driven Ember app. And like this is like how you marry those two things together in a seamless way that it works for everyone. So it was like really, really exciting.
It also has a really great sort of like you're in the Ember application itself, and then you like click an edit button just like you do with WordPress, and it takes you directly into an inline editor. So like this is this is his example Ember app, and it had a bunch of different talks on it, and he just jumps into like the edit mode and he starts editing things. It like creates him a branch automatically. He can share it. Like I could send this link of this preview or branch out to Steve, and Steve could work on it and commit as well. And it's super user friendly, and it really did feel like something that a lot of people are going to get behind.
Yeah, and this whole like CMS UI here, like all the black and gray, it's like one add-on that you wrap your page. So you like install the add-on, wrap your page in that component, and then like you have this. And it's like really cool. Like that was kind of his vision, is like kind of drag and drop. Like if you need this kind of editor, you just like drag it and put it on the page, and it's there. They also have a really cool model of like developing this stuff. Like basically the whole CardStack team is building these tools for clients, and then they're extracting everything from that client work to be open source and like making it open source. So like that roadmap that Ben just showed, like all the things on that roadmap are things that they've built for a client part of the client work, and they're able to extract that work, open source it. It's a pretty cool model of doing that.
And like, so that's your non-technical stakeholders. Like, I want to change the wording on this, and you really don't want that to be your problem.
Yeah. It's really great, especially for Ibotta, because we want to do like when we do a press release, they want like Ibotta.com/$100 million moment, and they can even control like routing. Like it will automatically create a route for them. They can control the content, images, like everything about it. We build it once, and they do their job, right? They don't have to get blocked by me, which is great. Frankie.
Yeah, what was some of the like underlying buzz that we're talking about? I'm assuming probably like something that earlier but everybody was hyped about talking about. Is there some big takeaway?
I think a lot of people were talking about CardStack. I don't know, what did you guys think? Ember concurrency.
So like
yeah.
last year it was service worker, and I kind of think it was. Like this year, that statement was to be around concurrency.
Yeah.
I think I heard a lot about Glimmer though, personal use, and the idea that it's Ember's answer to the criticism that Ember is loaded heavyweight framework.
Like outside of the conference, like that. What really surprised me was the JavaScript and programming community's reaction to Glimmer wasn't like "fuck you." It was, holy shit, Ember is not going gently into that dark night. Like, wow, they pulled it off. This is a legitimate competitor to React, which I love so much.
Yeah, I mean, I think Ember concurrency was really interesting, and his slides are all interactive and actually running Ember concurrency. But if you have an Ember app and you've ever seen calling set on destroyed component or whatever on a destroyed object, if you've ever seen that, replace it with an Ember concurrency task and you solve that problem immediately. There's also a ton of other stuff it can do. And I think the notes about the derived state were really interesting because anytime I see a pull request now with like a set is sending, reset set is sending, like it's so much easier just to ask the task, like, are you running or are you not running, right? As opposed to setting all these flags because you're going to screw it up. Like, it's just the way it works.
So another aspect of Glimmer that was like kind of a mind blower is not only do we like separated out the view layer, but the long-term vision for this is cool. Hey, I just want something that's a one-to-one replacement for React. You have that in your app. You go, holy shit, I love this. I love the build tool, I love the testing, I love all these aspects of it. Now on real Ember, you'll be able to gradually npm install your way up to full Ember. And so like it's not just the view layer, they're also looking at the router, Ember data, all of these things being things that you gradually add onto it so that you get a full Ember app over time if that's what you want. And so it really does address the like, I don't want all that complexity out of the box. Like you do, but if you don't believe that yet, like you can gradually get there. And I think that's going to like keep us in the conversation.
I think one of the other things related to that is that Glimmer is also a playground for Ember's future.
Yes.
And so, although it's not fully fleshed out yet, what Glimmer provides is what we will be able to do. That's what we want to do. Theoretically, side by side with existing. There's an RFC that talks about context manager, one manager. Theoretically, we'll be able to run different parts of the app with different managers, running different types of Ember with different versions. Theoretically, we'll be able to write another one of those reaction type components inside of this other section. And so the type of thing you're potentially opening up with that RFC.
Well, yes, when you look at it, like the end state of Glimmer is you have a web component that runs on a VM with the script tag, and now you can do angle bracket, just like Polymer or any other web component style framework. And so you could mix and match those. And this is delivering on a promise they made years ago on being web component compliant and standards compliant, and not trying to create their own DSL for everything. Like we are seeing the benefits of years of work on that now.
I'm switching to Preact. I don't know what you're talking about.
I think one of the other cool things that they kind of pointed out that enabled all of this stuff in Glimmer is that since the Ember framework is standardized on handlebars, they're able to, like, this is like the third or fourth rendering engine without ever changing the template syntax. So like with JSX, React, good luck doing that. Like you're pretty much stuck with like, whatever JSX compiles into. But with handlebars, they've been able to, basically do drop-in rendering engines without ever affecting the compatibility with your actual templates. So like the app I work on, we upgraded from like 2.4 or whatever to 2.10, which is like what introduced this completely new Glimmer rendering engine. It's the same templates. So that's also what like enables the whole wire format thing, where they compile your templates into this like really compact format that they can send over the network, which I think was like a 50% reduction in like the size of our app. And I think most Ember apps saw that, like the actual app bundle, just with this like one drop-in replacement, that much benefit.
Well, you remember too when React showed us all the power of one-way binding over two-way binding. Ember was a two-way binding framework, and they were like, "Oh shit, React was right. We were able to change metal without changing the API." And like we just got that free out of the box. That's pretty badass.
Anybody else? Shall we break? All right, well, I'll be around for questions.
honestly, the thing that I would leave you with is my favorite moment from EmberConf. And it was, oh shit, it's this. So this is 11 of us on stage at EmberConf, a lot of people in this room. As you can see, this isn't an enormous community, but proportionally, you don't see this at NGConf. You don't see this at ReactConf. I don't even think you see this absolutely, like this kind of cohesion. This is a really cool community to be a part of, and it just warms my heart that like I get to do this with you guys every month, every year. This is like that summer camp, and this is, I don't know, my weekend of the reserves or something like that. But I really like that we get to spend this time together, and I don't know, I'm glad we get to do it. So, cheers homies, let's party!